Hello and welcome. Captain Eric Winkle Brown was a remarkable man by any measure. He was a British Royal Navy test pilot who flew 487 types of aircraft, more than anyone else in history. He held the world record for the most aircraft carrier deck takeoffs and landings. He made the first landing of a twin-engine aircraft, an aircraft with tricycle undercarriage, and a jet aircraft and rotary wing aircraft on an aircraft carrier. During World War II, he flew many types of captured German, Italian and Japanese aircraft, including new jet and rocket aircraft. Brown spoke fluent German. In 1936, Brown's father had taken him to see the 1936 Olympics in Berlin. Father and son met Ernst Udet, a former World War I fighter ace who offered to take Eric up flying with him. Eric said, "You talk about aerobatics. We did everything, I think." He said to me as I got out of the cockpit, "You'll make a fine fighter pilot. Do me two favours. Learn to speak German fluently and learn to fly." This Brown did. In February 1938, he returned to Germany under the sponsorship of the Foreign Office as an exchange student. While there in Germany, he was woken up with a loud knocking on the door one morning in September 1939. Upon opening the door, he was met by a woman with the announcement that our countries are at war, and he was arrested by the SS. After 3 days incarceration, they merely escorted Brown in his MG Magnet sports car to the Swiss border, saying they were allowing him to keep the car because they had no spares for it. When World War II ended, Brown commanded the enemy aircraft flight to test fly captured aircraft. He was also asked to interrogate high-ranking Nazis, and he spoke about this in interviews. Imagine interviewing Goering, Himmler and Winkle.
2 months after I entered Germany, in the American occupation zone, they had a house near Luxembourg where they had some fairly high-ranking Germans in captivity, and one of them was Reichsmarschall Goering. I was given limited access to him to talk to him. I was told I mustn't talk about anything political, but could talk about the Luftwaffe aspects. I found him, strangely enough, quite an interesting personality. I would say engaging personality, because unlike some of the higher Nazis, he did not pretend that he was doing everything under orders, and therefore the blame was not his. He was quite forthcoming in saying that he was responsible for his actions in almost every field that you tackled him about, in aviation certainly. And he liked to talk, obviously, to pilots. One of the problems of Goering was he was as much interested in interrogating me as I was in interrogating him. He wanted to know a lot about our feelings of how the Luftwaffe were doing, where they went wrong, and when the cracks started to show from our point of view. So I found him very, very interesting from that aspect.
What about Himmler?
Yes, I had a very short interrogation of Himmler just before he committed suicide, and he was the absolute opposite of Goering. He really had not much to say for himself, and he always took refuge in the fact that he said he was acting entirely under orders from higher authority. I did ask him only one real question about aviation. I had heard that at one stage he had arrested, around about 1943 I think it was, he had arrested Werner von Braun, who was their top rocket man. So I asked him why this took place, and he said that he thought von Braun had lost interest in helping the war effort, but was devoting too much time to his visions of space travel. And this was the reason he withdrew him from, if you like, the rocket scene for a short time. I think it was only about 3 months.
Now, you interrogated Heinkel. Would you like to say something about Heinkel?
As Dr. Heinkel was an interesting little man, he was quite frank that within the Nazi hierarchy, he lived a bit on a knife edge. He was of Jewish origin, which was not the best thing to be in that situation, and he felt that his existence, or his continued existence, depended on him producing the goods for the Luftwaffe. I think this was a very fair assessment of his situation, but he certainly didn't give the impression of being highly nervous about it. He seemed to really be enjoying what he had to do as a designer. And of course, money was no object in those days, so it was a dream from a designer's point of view anyway. The first German successful ejection was in a jet Heinkel 280 in January 1942, and totally successful. We were up against a really technologically very advanced enemy. In fact, more technologically advanced than we were. They were way ahead of us with ejection seats. They didn't use cordite like Martin Baker eventually did. They used compressed air. And the one thing I think that showed their forward thinking was they reckoned that if aircrew had to use the ejection seat, they were in deep trouble and probably were out of control. And if they were out of control, the chances were they were being subjected to high G. Now, I found this in the DH-108. I got into a situation with a runaway oscillation and wanted to eject, but I was being subjected to 4G most of the time. And your arms are down here and you can't get them up to pull the blind. And there's nothing I could do. I just sit back and think of England. And but in the German situation, they had thought of this and had at the pilot's left thigh a trigger. And if you pushed that, out you went. Without face blind, of course, so you took a bit of a battering, but you got out. On the other hand, they had the disasters. Do you remember the Dornier 335, the one, the engine in front and the engine behind? When I was testing those, we dug out the German test pilots somewhere, and they told us a story that two had crashed and they'd found the test pilots with no arms. And we were very puzzled by this. So we looked into it at Farnborough, and because the sequence was, you had 3 buttons here, and you pressed 1, that blew the rear prop off. Pressed 2, that blew the fin and rudder off. So the mincing machines had gone. 3, you armed it, but then you had to jettison the canopy before you could pull the blind. And the canopy, say you're going that direction, had 2 things at each side of the canopy, 2 levers. And you had to grip these and pull them back over top dead center, and then it would go. But they were very difficult to pull. And, you know, you really had to hold and pull that, and then suddenly, bang, away it went. And they reckon these guys were holding so tight, the way it went, arms went with it. And so we checked this out in the Wintals of Farnborough, and it looked that way. was a very fast airplane. The problem was the engines hadn't been developed, and the rear engine tended to overheat. It was a little dangerous. In fact, the casualties we had at Farnborough and the Americans had were rear engines overheating. But it was a damn fast airplane. Very nice to fly too. But there we go. The night fighter that they hoped would be up to the Mosin, it was far from it. It was the Winkle 219. Mind you, it was a remarkable airplane because it was the first production aircraft with ejection seats for both crew. And it also had the thing that frightened the wits out of the bomber command. It had a thing called Schlägermusik, which were two 30mm guns on top of the aircrew cabin, angled up at 60 degrees. And you just flew under the thing and let blast. On the first sortie a Winkle 219 ever made, it killed 6 Lanks in one sortie. That's the sort of airplane it was. It also, in its career, operational career, had 12 ejections of both crew, pilot and radar, all totally successful. But it didn't have the speed to match, even remotely match the Mosin.
What do you remember of the captured German aircraft exhibition in 1945?
Oh, a lot, because I was very involved. We had brought all the aircraft back. I was one of the pilots who was mainly involved. There were only 2 really involved in bringing back the jets to Farnborough. And then we had the exhibition, and we were each assigned, when I say each, we only had 4 pilots in Aeroflight at that time, an aircraft to demonstrate during that week. And I was demonstrating the Winkle 162, which was the little Volksjäger. And I think it was the Thursday or the Friday, I'm not sure which, the chap who was demonstrating the ME-262 suddenly had a sore throat and couldn't fly. So I was asked to take on the 262 and handed over the 162 to somebody who had flown it, but not a lot. He had been a prisoner of war. Now, I really don't know what he was doing at Farnborough, because he certainly wasn't what I call up to date with what went on. But I briefed him to the best of my ability. But unfortunately, on the day, he got carried away a bit, I think, with the occasion, and decided to do what I'd advised him not to do, and we had a fatal accident. So that rather marred the last part of the exhibition, but otherwise it was a great success.
So there was a flying display. Were you doing aerobatics?
That's correct, yes. And the Winkle 162 wasn't a great aerobatic airplane because the jet engine, the BMW 003 jet engine, would only stand 3 seconds of inverted flight. So you had to get round pretty quick, but it had a marvellous rate of roll, so that was no worry, really.
Oh, okay. The testing or evaluation of German aircraft ended in 1946 after the crash of the Dornier 335. If that hadn't have happened, do you think testing would have continued, or had you learned everything that you could learn?
No, I think we'd sucked the orange dry, frankly, yes. And there wasn't much more for us to learn from it.
The reports that you and your fellow pilots wrote on enemy aircraft, how was this information disseminated to frontline squadrons? Through reports, or did it involve touring airfields with captured aircraft to show? Before
the war, we had some captured aircraft, of course, which had crash-landed in this country or inadvertently flown into one of our airfields by mistake. And when we evaluated these, we went round the squadrons and which were involved in combat with them, and told them what we thought were the weaknesses of these aircraft, the Achilles heels. And so all that happened before the end of the war. After the war, they were just really museum pieces. And we, to my knowledge, we didn't go around disseminating any information. The reports were available to them, but there was no specific requirement to brief them on them.
Was there any German aircraft you evaluated during the war where you thought, this is so much more advanced, we should just put it into production ourselves in the UK?
Oh yes, the one which staggered us, frankly, with its quantum jump in performance was the twin jet Messerschmitt 262. When I tested it here at Farnborough, it was 125 miles an hour faster than any Allied fighter. Now this puts it in a league by its own. It is virtually untouchable. And that rattled us, frankly, to find that. And it's just as well that they were unable to produce them fast enough to really make a nuisance of themselves. And anyway, at this stage in the war, which is very late, they were running out of, the Germans were running out of pilots and running out of fuel. But the thought of them perhaps having pilots and fuel and a lot of these jets was a bit sobering.
What's your opinion on the German sort of flying wing designs, the Horten 9? Would you think they would have made a good...
Oh yes, I believe the Horten brothers, who were specialists in tailless aircraft, really, or all wing aircraft. It's a difficult formula to get right, but when you get it right, it pays huge dividends. And the Horten 9, they had certainly, I think, got it right. And the great pity is that although we captured one which could have been repaired and it went to the United States, it was never brought to fruition. We know it has flown. It flew about 4 times, but not with what I call an experienced test pilot, which is a great pity. But I had great faith in the Horten brothers as designers.